Hey everyone, welcome back to this episode of Alison and Paige Do Canada Reads. We last episode we talked about what Canada Reads is, and we talked about the long list. A couple weeks ago, CBC released the shortlist of 5 books. So Alison and I have started reading those, and today we're going to have a little discussion on the first book that we both read, and Alison's going to take it from here.
All right, so the first book we are reading from the shortlist is this one. I have the physical copy here. Paige read the audiobook. So this is a two-spirit journey, the autobiography of a lesbian Ojibwa-Cree elder by Ma-Nee Chacaby. Also co-written by Mary Louisa Plummer as well. So I'm going to start with a bit of just a brief synopsis of the book. No real spoilers here. We'll let you know before you have to stop if you're planning on reading the book. So this was published in 2016. Paige, we talked about how kind of cool it is that with Canada Reads, the book doesn't necessarily need to come out the same year that Canada Reads is happening. So just about 10 years ago, it won some awards back then, including the Lambda Literary Award, which is for queer literature, which is really great. The book essentially chronicles Ma-Nee's life as she grows up through the legacy of colonialism. So she was born in 1950 in a tuberculosis sanatorium, and then she was raised by her grandmother in a remote Ojibwa community called Ombabika in northern Ontario, and then it talks about her life as she goes into adulthood. And, she tells the story of how she overcame some truly harrowing experiences of abuse, alcoholism, racism, many other hardships to really have a positive impact on the people around her and the community around her as well. And I did a bit of reading online just to kind of prep for this, and some people were calling it a journey of self-discovery, which I really liked as well. And what's kind of unique about this book, we'll talk a bit about the afterword page at some point, but in the afterword, Mary Louisa Plummer, who co-wrote the book, says that there are so few stories and records recounting the perspectives of poor, recovering, alcoholic, visually impaired, and lesbian Indigenous women like Chacaby. So it makes it a very unique story as well. In terms of Chacaby herself, I don't want to talk too much about her because I feel like it'll give some spoilers, right? But just to list a couple things, she's an artist, an activist, a survivor, a mother, an elder, a writer, a grandmother, so much more. And I'll just leave it at that because you'll just have to read the book. But I did want to read one quote from Chacaby about why she wanted to write the book. It was from an interview a while back, so I'll just read that. I want to leave something for my kids, my great-granddaughter and my great-grandsons. I want them to know what I was about, what I was made of, what I stood for, because there is so much violence in the communities up north and around us. I wish more Native women and older women, even the ones that are older than me, could write their story about their life to share it with other people so their kids can grow to understand them and learn from them. We are storytellers. That is our gift. And if they share their real stuff, what really happened in the past, the kids will learn from it. So I thought that was a really great quote.
As we talked before in the last episode, each of the books of Canada Reads is going to be, what we're calling championing each of the books. So that means that there'll be one person who's advocating for that book to win Canada Reads. And so Alison, maybe you could just tell us a bit about the person that will be advocating for A Two-Spirit Journey. And I think you've read a bit about who that is.
Yeah, so Shayla Stonechild is championing A Two-Spirit Journey. I think she's going to do really well in the debates, just based on some of the things that I've seen. She seems really passionate about choosing this book. She's Red River Métis, and she's Nihiao Isku from Muskatpetang First Nations in Saskatchewan. She's founder of the Matriarch Movement podcast, which amplifies Indigenous voices. She's won a number of awards. She's been on TV. She was on season 9 of Amazing Race Canada, which is really neat. And she's a very strong advocate for Indigenous rights and language revitalization. So I'm sure, I think it makes sense that she chose this book. I mean, this is amplifying Indigenous voices, especially the voice of an elder. So I think she's going to be a great champion for the book.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like something she cares about in her personal life, work life, all of that. So yeah, she'll do a really good job, like, um, advocating.
Absolutely.
So that'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. So I just a couple disclaimers before we kind of talk about the book. Firstly, just for a bit of content warning, there are themes of abuse, alcoholism, and other themes. So just want to put that out there as a bit of a content warning. And then secondly, Paige and I are not Indigenous. We're settlers on this land. I'm in Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg. Paige is in Mi'kma'ki in Halifax. And I want to say that it's essential that settlers and non-Indigenous folks bear witness to these kind of stories, and we can't look away from the pain that colonizers caused when they arrived here and stole this land. So it's one thing to just read someone's story, but it's another to take action as a result. And I just want to remind everyone that we need to be doing better. So we want to be respectful of this important story, and we'll be talking about Ma-Nee's story here today.
Perfect. Thank you for saying that.
Yep.
So from if you haven't read the book and you want to read the book and you don't want to hear spoilers or then I would just pause now because we're gonna kind of dive into it and talking about all like different parts of the book and everything. So yeah, I think a great place to start would be the theme of Canada Reads. There's always like the main theme and sort of the sub theme of the year. So first, the main theme is a book that every Canadian should read.
Mm,
So this like for sure, like in my mind fits that. Like
absolutely.
all
Totally
very
agree.
like just where you're saying like this painful history of like the land that we're living on,
Mhm.
um, and like someone who is still alive, who grew up like not very long ago, and who like went through so much. I definitely think like every Canadian could benefit from, or pretty much every Canadian could benefit from reading this story. Um, and yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, um, I think that often it seems that Indigenous women are silenced, and this is a fantastic way to continue to get stories about Indigenous women out into the world and for people to read these stories. So that's another reason why I think like this is a book that yeah, every Canadian should read.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah,
And I'm going to quote Mary Louisa Plummer again, who co-wrote the book with Shakaby, but um, she said Shakaby's rare first-person perspective provides insight into how racism, homophobia, violence, substance abuse, and poverty have shaped Indigenous women's experiences in Canada. And yeah, it just like it's really important for people to learn about the, the experience of Indigenous women, or one of the
yeah.
experiences, as there are many.
Absolutely. And I think this book is also unique in that it's like her it's decades of her life. Like
Mm,
it's not like it's a long period of time. It's like over 70 years or
yeah.
yeah, years. So to have like that all chronicled out and like for there to be like details of like every decade of her life really like is unique. I think I'm not sure how many other books there are. Definitely not really many that I've heard of.
Oh no. Just so passionate.
Exactly. And yeah, and then there's like the theme of this year is a book that changes the narrative. So I'm sure we agree on this. Like this changes the narrative as far as like broadening like people's perspectives on negative history and of like that we have. I don't know like how to articulate that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like in this case, the broader theme, a book every Canadian should read and change the narrative, almost means that you should read this book because it changes the narrative. And it shines a light on a lot of the things that I think Canada wants to look away from and
Mm-hmm.
wants to look away from some really ugly, awful history. And it's also a story of how someone overcame. And I think there's hope as well in that story. So it kind of takes you. I find this book just like takes you through all kinds of emotions, right? Like there's some really dark moments, and then there's some really like beautiful moments, and it's just like this almost like um yeah, it just takes you into so many places and to so many feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the only like small like thing that could maybe detract from this being able to be a book that every Canadian should read is like there are a lot of like triggering like
Yeah,
moments and
that's a good point.
uh, stories that she shares. So I think like if you're able to read those, like it is like really eye opening. Um, but that would be sort of the only thing that maybe a different kind of story might be
Yeah,
more beneficial to read. Like if you don't feel comfortable like reading
totally.
some of so that was sort of like it's an extremely small like detractor, I think.
Hmm.
Um, that kind of crossed my mind.
Yeah.
Uh, it would be like difficult to read for some people.
Yeah. And that kind of, what did you think of the writing style? Or I guess you listened to the audiobook, right?
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, what did you think of the style of writing? And do you think you would have had a different experience reading the actual physical book instead?
Yeah, like I found the style. So I did really like enjoy this book. It's one of those things like looking back on it, especially like enjoyed it. But it was I'm used to reading like fiction, like thrillers with like
Mm.
twists and ups and downs and all of this and cliffhangers. And so this is a lot different than that. This was a very like steady book. Like it
Yeah,
was
it's a good word.
like there were it felt like we were going through her life at like a steady pace and like seeing all of that, and sometimes
Yeah.
that includes the mundane, as it should. But yeah, I think that like I'm not sure if it would have changed that much reading the book versus the audiobook in this case,
Except there
honestly.
are photos in the physical book
Yeah,
for those
so
who
Elsa
read the
was
physical
texting
book.
photos like
Yeah.
as I needed. Yeah, that was the other thing. It was like it would describe the photo, so I
Yeah.
definitely had a but then I was kind of curious like what the photo looked like. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be. And then I guess one good thing is like hearing like the proper pronunciation of things,
Right.
which like
Yes.
I wouldn't really have known unless I like looked it up.
Mhm.
Otherwise, for some of the words. So yeah, like you kind of maybe read kind of more nonfiction maybe and less of those like thrillers and stuff. So did you feel like this sort of how do you think this compared with like other like the pacing or just the content or of it, like other memoirs or biographies or nonfiction books you've read?
Yeah, I like the language, and for those, I guess who read it, and if you haven't read the afterword, it's actually a really, I don't often read afterwards, but this one's actually really interesting. Talks about how Money's, like her native language is Cree, in Ojibwe, not English. She learned English in her 20s, and so she wanted this book to be, more accessible to people, and so wanted to be in a very clear kind of English language and very direct, which I actually really enjoyed. But in
Yep.
terms of like other memoirs, I've read a few others, and what I liked about this one is it seemed a lot more real
Mm,
than other ones I've read. I feel like the other ones I've read have been more like celebrities, like,
mm,
Britney Spears, for example. And like, I feel like those feel like they have a filter on them
yeah, oh, definitely.
sometimes. This, like, it felt like I actually got to know Money, like her as a person, and just like I felt that a bit more, and so that was part of my why I like the book so much.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I would say I appreciate the rawness of it. I mean, yeah, there were some really like tough parts to read for sure, but putting yourself out there and putting your story out there is a really brave thing to do. So I think I can appreciate that as well.
yeah, I agree. I feel like she put everything out there. Like she just laid it down and just was extremely like candid. She would just be like this happened and like would tell us like exactly how she felt, and it wasn't like another reason why like this would be a good book for many Canadians to read is like it's just things are said plainly. It's not like
Yeah,
with language. It's not hard to understand what she's saying. It's not like convoluted or anything, so it is like easy to read
yeah,
or listen to and understand in that way. So yeah, and I feel like with the celebrities, like they're like there's always going to be some mask and some that they can't like reveal. But I think
Yeah.
was like I'm gonna like say everything. That's what it
Yeah.
felt. Yeah.
Because it was important, it's important to like her children. Like she wants her children to understand her history and their history, and her grandchildren as well. And then another reason why I was drawn to this book was the fact that Ma-Nee is two-spirit. Um, and I think that two-spirit, it feels like there's not a lot of knowledge around what that means and how it can mean many different things to Indigenous people. And like I'm a member of the queer community, and yeah, I think it's something that we need to educate ourselves more and understand better because it's a lot deeper than many people realize. So yeah, I just wanted to learn more about the experiences of a two-spirit person as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
that was important.
because I feel like I haven't heard that much of it. Like I'm aware of the term and like I've heard it here and there. But this definitely sort of dove a bit deeper into that.
Yeah, for sure. So you said a bit earlier that you read a lot of thrillers and fiction, and maybe this wouldn't be something that you necessarily saw in the bookstore and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna buy and read that book." And I'm curious, like, is the book what you expected? Like, do you think maybe you'd kind of delve a little more into nonfiction kind of books, or yeah, I guess what did you kind of take away from reading this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a book that I would have necessarily picked up just because, yeah, it's just not like within the genre that I usually read. But I think like as far as like generally, it was somewhat what I expected.
Yeah.
Um, like a life story. Obviously, didn't like the content. I didn't know what exactly it would be, but somewhat, what I thought it would be. And yeah, I think it would like definitely make me think about maybe reading something similar in the future, like more
Mhm.
about um like two spirit individuals or just like the stories of different folks that I wouldn't necessarily read about. And yeah, I did enjoy it for sure. Like it's a book that I enjoyed reading and looking back, like reflecting on it. Definitely enjoyed it, so I'm definitely glad I read it. I'm glad it was included in
Yeah.
Canada. um
And that's the benefit, like we've talked about this before, like reading books you don't normally read, and then also getting to read about perspectives that, like, I mean, we just walk through the world differently. Like, we walk
yeah
through a different world than many, and so we get, for a moment, and to read and learn about our experience and have a better understanding of what our life is like. And I think that's, I mean, how can you say that's not a good, like, how can you say that's not beneficial in some way, to kind of, I'm losing track of my
broaden
points.
your like perspective, I
Yes,
guess.
exactly. There we go. Broaden
Right.
perspective.
Is there, is there like any specific moment or like chapter in the book that stood out to you in particular?
Yeah, I've been thinking a bit about this, and it's kind of like a small moment, and I'm curious if you remember it. But um, Ma-Nee was with her children at the playground, and she was talking about how the other parents would kind of sit and watch their kids play, but
Mhm.
she liked to go and play with her kids because they would tell her things that they normally like wouldn't
Uh,
say. And I just thought that was like such a, like, despite all the crap and hard stuff that she's gone through, like she is just cares so much about her kids, and wants to be a good mother and was willing to do anything for them. And I just thought that was like a really like tender, nice moment, because just showed you how much she loves her children,
yeah.
how much she cares about and cares about what they have to say, and wants to connect with them. So I thought that was really special.
That whole like idea of her like going through such hard things and yet like helping people and like trying to help people so much and like she's such a good person, like that really like stood out to me as well.
Yeah.
Like she's been through all this. She helped like these like pregnant like mothers who help like people who are like homeless and or like have unstable housing, and she just like helped so many people and fostered children and like just really like was always like helping people,
Yeah.
which pretty like impressive or like you know
Yeah, she fostered so many kids. Like there were
like
always kids in our house, which is like impressive.
yeah, definitely
Yeah. I
definitely
have, yeah. Um
yeah. like 50 or something, and she started like fostering like Abby, I think it was, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, it just keeps going. A couple parts definitely that stood out to me. One is like her talking about, like, it's kind of a bit later in the book, maybe 2/3 of the way into the book, talking about just like her day to day, living like in an apartment and like shopping for groceries and just being really tight on money,
Yeah.
and really having to like be conscious of that and just kind of just getting by like
Yeah.
every just seemed very difficult.
Yeah.
And like
Definitely.
um so I definitely have thought about that a few times since I read that, coping with her vision decreasing, which must be very, very difficult as well.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I can't even imagine. And she probably didn't even realize like her vision was that bad until someone like told her, right?
We should probably talk about her grandma a little bit, like
Yeah,
leading.
sure.
So she was raised by her grandma, and that was like her grandma was an extremely important person to
For
her.
sure.
And seemed like a very good role model as
Yeah.
well. Very like caring, loving, and she's someone who even like spoke about how many is like two spirit
Yeah.
and have that in her, which
Yeah.
obviously left an impression. And I think maybe like helped her, like, I think for a long time she was uncertain about her sexuality and her identity,
Yeah.
but maybe I feel like the fact that her grandma and her talked about that early on maybe helped her like figure that out or like come to terms with that in a sense. But like, yeah, so that probably helped her in a way. Yeah, and her grandma just seemed like a really, really like good person as well. And
Yeah, I
good.
think that she gave Ma-Nee a lot of strength, like
Mm,
to, and like that foundation, like that important relationship was essential, I think, for Ma-Nee to kind of like move through her life and that
mm,
self-discovery and like figure out who she is and make sure she is connected with like her culture and um her people. So yeah, it was really like that was one of the relationships that definitely like stood out a lot. I mean, you see Ma-Nee throughout the book like form all these different kinds of relationships with different people.
oh yeah.
Um, a very like kind of sad and difficult relationship with her mother, but yeah, it was good that she had that kind of very strong, very like reliable grandmother, and she lived to like over 100 or something like that,
Yeah.
didn't she?
Yeah.
Like, um,
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was yeah, I that stood out to me as well.
Yeah. When I like finished the book, and it's an audiobook, the audiobook was like 12 hours long, and it had been like there was still like almost an hour left, and it was the afterword. And I was like, oh, that's like a good chunk of time. Like usually afterwards like 5 pages.
Yeah,
So I guess I'll like start listening to the afterword and just like see what that's all about. And I
yeah,
ended up listening, because it was really interesting. Like it was um, the kind of co-author of the book, or like in a
yeah,
sense, explaining how they wrote the book.
yeah,
So it's something that I was aware of, but like couldn't probably articulate. Would be the type of autobiography this is a told to autobiography,
yeah.
which means like Ma-Nee sat down with, can you remind me of her name?
Mary Louisa Plummer.
So Ma-Nee sat down with Mary Louise Plummer and told her like her story. And Mary Louise Plummer, she really like academically and like tried to do the best of her ability to take what Ma-Nee said, um, and like write down what she said and write it into something that is a book. And there's a lot to think about with that. There's a lot like ins and outs, which I didn't realize. And if
Yeah,
you haven't read the book, um, like definitely look into this more because it's super interesting. Of like just getting things accurate and also making it like readable, because you can imagine that just someone telling a story, you have to like articulate everything in a way that's readable and that makes sense, and it's paced correctly and
yeah.
all.
And keeping like Ma-Nee's voice in the
Yeah,
book, like that
that
was
was
something she talked about too, like making
yeah,
sure that she's not changing too much, but changing
yeah,
enough so that it comes together as a book. Um, yeah, super interesting. I was like, I'm going to start reading this too, and then I was like, oh, this is actually quite
yeah,
interesting. And so much, yeah, so much work went into making this book happen, and it's pretty amazing. So, yeah,
the other thing that stood out to me, which is unfortunately like doesn't surprise me, but a lot of like folks in the like secondary author's position take credit for the person telling the story, and they like steal the story,
yeah,
they become first author, and they don't really like aren't a good custodian of the
yeah.
story. So that unfortunately does
But in this
happen.
case, you don't
Yeah.
see them on the cover
No,
and the
exactly.
tiny little
Yeah.
co-writer name here. So it's
Yeah.
really all about Ma-Nee for this one, and they're friends as well. So I think that helps. But
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, I'm not. It's nice when, in this case, the co-writer decentered themselves from this story
Yeah.
because it wasn't really their story. I mean, they did so much work to support Ma-Nee in getting the story out there, but that's a great point. I think it's great to see that Ma-Nee's front and center here. It's her
Yeah.
story, you know. So
Exactly. Which I think is really well done in that sense.
yeah, agreed.
Yes. Overall, I think this book. I think if this book won Canada Reads, like I'd be satisfied.
Yeah,
I haven't read all the books yet, so I'm not gonna necessarily say this is like the one that I want to win. But I
yeah,
would, for sure, that if this one, I'd say it deserves that.
yeah.
Um,
I think
yeah,
Shayla Stonechild is gonna like go hard for this book, and so I'm looking forward to listening. And I think those start next month, right? In March.
in March, yeah,
Yeah,
like mid.
yeah.
So, yeah, our plan is to kind of continue reading the books, putting out these sort of episodes on each book. And, you know, we'd love if you'd read along. The next book that we're going to be reading is Watch Out for Her, which is a thriller. So I'm excited about that. And so if you want to go ahead and read that one and kind of follow us along, we can let you know at the end of each episode which one we're going to do next if you want to follow along.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. And everyone should definitely read, at least in my opinion, A Two-Spirit Journey. Until next
Absolutely.
time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.